Well, welcome to the afternoon session of day 3 of LC 2021. I'm delighted to welcome Suzanne Faulkner, Mia Graham and David Tate. And they're going to provide us with expecting a very interesting presentation on bridging the digital and physical space with Snapchat. So, Susan, David, Mia, thank you very much.
Okay, so we can flip on to the next slide. It's a very, very long title slide, so thank you for that. And I just want to bring to your attention that Mia and David are actually first-year students now progressing into second-year students, so be kind. So I started using Snapchat in 2018 with my students, but obviously coronavirus brought with it additional and new problems in the past academic year. So Snapchat really came into its own with creating a community and allowing our students to learn at home. Next slide, please. So when it comes to our students study prosthetics and orthotics, and there's a lot of hands-on practical activity required in that course, we do a lot of student demonstrations. Now, not only did we have the added issue of coronavirus, but typically in a normal year, we're demonstrating patient assessment techniques to students. They're taking notes on the techniques. Invariably, they miss some of the demonstration because they're taking notes. So next slide, please. So the solution that we came up with was actually to record lots of short videos. And thankfully, we did this last year pre-pandemic, and we had this fantastic resource of lots of different patient assessment videos to share with our students, meaning that they could actually conduct patient assessment on family and friends at home. Next slide, please. So I'm sure many of you who are attending conference today will know what Padlet is, but just in case you don't, I like to describe it as an electronic pin board where students and staff can collaborate together. It's interactive and you can pin various resources such as videos, text documents and audio as well. And it can be password protected. Next slide, please. So originally, when I created the Padlet with all these videos, there was no structure or rhyme or reason to it. It was just all put together on a Padlet. And the students very much appreciated having this resource to go back over and to look at when they were at home. But given that we had very limited clinical contact this year due to contact, it meant that the students were actually able to look at the videos and practice these techniques on family members. Next slide, please. So, as I said previously, there was no rhyme or reason or no structure to the way that these videos were put together on the Padlet. And I got feedback from students. I'm always asking for feedback. What can we do better? And I was told I would have liked it if the patient assessment videos were set up more clearly and in a set order. So if we can show the next slide, please, Mia. So what I did was I changed the format of the Padlet and made it much more structured. So the patient assessment videos were in different columns related to whether it was muscle, ligament testing, and different parts of the foot and ankle. Next slide, please. So this meant it was much more structured. Now, I want to talk about the fact that with the Padlets, we shared the Padlet on the University of YLE, but we also shared it on our class Snapchat group, and we'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. But feedback from the students is that they like the instant feedback they get, whether they're on campus or on Snapchat, and they find it much easier than sending emails. Next slide, Mia, sorry. One of the advantages as well that we have and the fact that we are sharing these resources on Snapchat and not necessarily just on the University of YLE, it means that students can access them easily, anytime, anywhere. In a time where students were commuting to campus, they could look at these resources on the bus, on the train, or they could even look at them on the sofa. They don't have to go through the process of logging into the University of YLE, finding the class and finding the resources. On Snapchat, these resources are there instantly for them. Mia, did you want to say a bit about how you find it useful?
Yeah, so I find it really useful being able to access the Padlets and stuff through Snapchat whilst we were outside of like working hours. So for me, I commute quite a bit. So it was great being able to look at the stuff on the train or on the bus whenever I was traveling. And even just when I was going between work shifts and things, it was a good way of just revising over the day and seeing what was on there and what I needed to look at.
Thank you, Mia. And we were actually very lucky in that we were one of the few courses who did actually manage to get some time on campus. So Mia was able to look at these resources on the go. Next slide, please. So going back to Snapchat, was Snapchat gets a bit of a bad reputation due to the fact that it has been and can be used inappropriately. And I don't think I need to explain to anybody what the images on the screen refer to. People have and do send nudes, etc. On Snapchat, relying on the fact that these messages disappear within 5 or 10 seconds. So I am delighted to assure you that we don't do that in our class Snapchat group. We actually use the group function. In Snapchat, if you're just using the app normally, the messages do disappear within 5 or 10 seconds. Using the group function, the messages appear, and if you press on the message, it can stay there indefinitely. If not, it disappears after 24 hours. So I make sure on our group Snapchat groups that the communication is maintained by pressing on the message. Next slide, please. And I'll say one of the reasons that I prefer Snapchat to WhatsApp, they've got similar functionality. With Snapchat, the students can join using the Snap code, which means we don't have to share mobile phone numbers like we would have to if we were joining on WhatsApp. But why use Snapchat? It's where my students are. And if you look at the statistics here, 77% of those between the age of 18 and 24 are Snapchat users. And I did this because the students weren't engaging in the chats and forums on the VLE. And when I asked them why, they said it was too many steps to get there. Next slide, please. So David, over to you. And David, I'd just like to say is a mature student, so I was keen to get David's input.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. So what I would like to say is that initially, Snapchat wouldn't have been my first choice for a sort of education portal, if you will. I remember downloading Snapchat back in 2014 and promptly deleting it after 2 months, I think, because it was just nonsense and it was a place for my friends and other people to be silly, and I didn't really sort of buy into it all. So being a mature student, am I coming through okay? Sorry, just...
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, so being a mature student, when Suzanne prompted the idea for Snapchat as a education tool, I thought, oh my goodness, not again. What am I getting myself in for? So, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that it has changed a lot as an app, and the group function that we use it for is a great aid to myself and my fellow students.
Fantastic. Next slide, please, Mia. So this is just the first snap that I sent out to students in 2018. It was I think it was about 9 o'clock or something on a Saturday night, and I got lots of engagement, which made me think actually there's something in this. Next slide, Mia, please. Bitmojis, we use Bitmojis to communicate as well as just text through the use of Snapchat, and I can use that to encourage students, to congratulate them when they get stuff right. Mia, do you want to mention something about that?
Yeah, so Suzanne quite often uses Bitmojis when she's on Snapchat in our group chat, and it's quite nice because obviously we just use it for texting. It's more like typed words. We don't take photos or anything unless we're doing like photos of like we're doing a patient assessment or something. So it's nice just to be able to see more like her expression, I guess. It gives more depth to her message. You can then like see how she's feeling, and it feels nicer getting that from her.
Fantastic. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so when I ask students about what they like about Snapchat, they'll say that it's less stressful than emailing. I'm going to ask Mia to say something more about that in just a second. But they found it very beneficial. On the run-up to exams, the Snapchat group gets very busy. And students find it's a more relaxed way of asking questions. And also at the bottom here, it says we can see when you're available. So your avatar essentially pops up. The students know when I go onto Snapchat, I'm there because I've got time to communicate with them. And one of the significant benefits to me is that it allows the students to interact with each other and me at the same time. So rather than one student emailing me and getting an answer to that question, the student sends me a message in Snapchat and everyone can benefit from those interactions. Next slide, please, Mia. So there are pros and cons to the use of Snapchat, and I can see there's a question just come up here just now. What do students think about you being in their space? And I guess maybe David and Mia, do you want to have a respond to that briefly just now? What do you think about having me there? Is that something you welcome or not?
Yeah, so having you in your space. Sorry, sorry, David.
No, on you go.
Thank you. I'll let you go after. It's not too like personal. Like it's nice because we get to know Suzanne through the chats, and obviously we get to communicate with her a lot faster. But one of the good features about Snapchat and things are that I can have Suzanne blocked from my stories, so she doesn't have to see like all the stuff I'm doing in my life or what I'm posting. So I'm just like all she sees is what I put in the group chat. So it's not like she's in our personal space. It's quite good.
And what about you, David? What do you think?
Yeah, just to sort of elaborate on what Mia said, I think the Snapchat we use as purely university stuff. We have our own group chat on Facebook Messenger where it's just the students. There's no lecturers involved. So we do have our own space outside of that as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think we feel that there's always a lecturer sort of looming in the chat, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Thanks, David. Thank you, Mia. And I've mentioned before, the pros are that I can communicate with many students at one time, and without a doubt, the engagement I've had with the class skyrocketed when I started using Snapchat compared to the forums where I literally got zero engagement, and it allows students to learn on the go. With regards to the cons, when I started using Snapchat, it was a group size maximum of 32. It's now up to 63, and that works perfectly. Our whole year group sizes really exceed 50, so our whole year group can be on the one chat. It is important that you manage the expectations of the students with regards to when you're going to be available. Another potential downside is that it is increasing the use of social media, both of staff and students, and we have to think about that. And it does require extra time. I do communicate with our students out with normal office hours because our students tend to be in 9 to 5 every day. If I restricted my use of Snapchat to just those office hours, then it wouldn't be of much use. Next slide, please, Mia. Okay, David, over to you. You're going to talk about, from the student perspective, the pros and cons of using Snapchat as a tutorial tool.
Yep, thank you, Suzanne. So I think one of the wonderful things about having Snapchat on your phone is you can take screenshots of really anything that's been talked about in the chat. So if somebody asks a question, you take a screenshot of the question and then you can benefit from the answer by screenshotting it as well. And these tend to be saved in your phone library, so you can reflect on them at any point in the future for studying. And it's instantaneous. As long as you've got your phone with you, you have access to these photos. But I think one of the major downsides to that is if you are an avid phone user, you use your phone camera a lot, you then run the risk of losing the screenshot in your phone's library. So I think you need to really manage where you are storing these these screenshots, and maybe dedicate an entire album to, say, Snapchat and per subject, and dedicating the sort of space to that. That way you can really understand and know where it is when you need it. And I think the drawback, I think sometimes if there's lots of short answers, you end up with tons of screenshots. If there's a long format answer, you end up with 3 screenshots that's all the same answer. You know, so and again, it all sort of plays into, if you lose one of those photos, you've lost pretty much part of the conversation. So
yeah,
that's all on.
Thank you, David. Okay, and over to you, Mia, now, please.
Right, so I'm going to talk about silent learning benefits. So silent learners are students kind of like myself. I sometimes find it hard to ask questions to lecturers during class times, just for like confidence reasons or whatever. But using Snapchat is great because you can see other people's questions and the answers. And they could be questions that you weren't going to ask, but somebody else has. And therefore, you get to see their answer, which you wouldn't if they'd asked in class, like at the end, and you missed out on that. So you get to see more answers and see what other kind of questions are being asked. And then, as David was saying, you can screenshot it and save it for later, and it really helps with your studies. You also get to, it's easier to ask questions because it's not that sort of going up, and it seems less sort of formal. It makes it easier because you know they're going to reply quite quickly. And quite often, the questions that you're asking, other students are also asking. That's one thing that I found really good, was I could see other students were asking similar questions to what I was thinking. And it made me feel like maybe my smaller questions weren't so silly, because quite often I was too worried to ask questions in case I appeared like I didn't understand the subject. But it also created a great sort of support group, because even if the lecturer, like Suzanne, wasn't available at the time, so the other students then would help answer your question, and you could form a relationship with them. And maybe if you had more questions that they knew the answer to, you could message them, and it kind of created more of a sort of community with us all, and we all got a bit closer.
Fantastic. Next slide, please. Thanks, Mia.
Okay. So well. So one thing that was very sort of, I struggled with, was the late night messaging. So Suzanne was great because she did always, she was very available, especially late in the evening, which is great if you have a job or if you have many things going on in the day and you want to ask questions later. Or even if you just want to go over things in the evening and sort of consolidate what you learned during the day. But because of COVID, we obviously haven't had the 9-to-5 schedule that we usually have. So therefore, a lot of it's been work in your own time or do this when you can. So quite often I found myself working quite late into the evening just to keep up with stuff. And it would be, might have got to 9 o'clock and I started making my dinner and I can hear the group chat going off, and it'll be people asking questions about stuff that I haven't looked at yet, or maybe a pop quiz going on, which for me I found quite stressful, just because you're finally relaxed and all of a sudden there's more stuff to learn. But it has been great for other people who are busy during the day and then come back. But we thought, after feedback from our other students, that maybe a curfew or like a time where it's cut off is required, so then people can stop at the end of the day.
Thanks, Mia, and that's great feedback. I thought I was doing well being available to students, but it's important that students know that they can switch up, and also for me and my family as well. Next slide, please, Mia. So we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages. The students can learn anytime and anywhere. And with flipped learning having availability to these resources, the students can be better prepared when they come into our clinical sessions. There are challenges in terms of time and resources. We have to also consider digital poverty, and learning in isolation can be an issue. However, using the learning materials such as the videos with our Snapchat group help to reduce that as an issue. Next slide, please, Mia. So GDPR, this question always comes up. What about GDPR when it comes to, and there was a reason that GDPR, the slide was actually half cut off, and that's because the students do have an awareness of, okay, I kind of know what, I've heard of GDPR, but actually in speaking to students, they've not got a great awareness really of what GDPR is and why it's there in the first place. Snapchat is GDPR compliant. They've got a statement in relation to GDPR, but I think I need to do better, and we all need to do better in having these discussions with our students about GDPR and how their data is being used. And I would actually say very few people in the class actually had to download Snapchat. they all had it, most of them had it on their device already, and it is voluntary, it's not mandatory. But absolutely GDPR is something that we need to be aware of, but the university is supportive in my use of Snapchat as a tutorial tool. Next slide, please. Just bringing it all back together again, it absolutely did bridge formal and informal learning. It created a safe space for the students to be able to ask questions that perhaps they wouldn't do in class, or found it too stressful to find an email. It absolutely resulted in enhanced participation and helped us to develop a learning community. And this is a quote I got from a student on the chat the other day, saying that this chat helped us to get to know you more than any other lecturer. Last year, it was so important for me that the students felt that they had someone that they could communicate with, particularly, and develop a relationship with, specifically when we were not on campus. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so there's a reference slide after this, but we can leave it on this. This is a class of 2021 who graduated, and using their Bitmojis, I was able to create a graduation picture for them, which was something we couldn't do on campus as we normally would. I'd just really like to thank David and Mia for giving up their time and doing so brilliantly to present an academic conference when you're just getting into your second year. So thank you both very much, and we'd love to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, David and Mia. We've had quite a few questions come in, but you've also answered the questions as we've gone along, I've noticed. But I just wanted to pick one up here for me and David. Is Anna Armstrong asked, how easy is it to manage your learning when you have materials in different places? And I know, Susan, you mentioned the VLE, the Snapchat. How do you manage that divide? If I go to David first. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. With a lot of care and attention, I think. I think it's the same with any university course. I think even if we weren't in a pandemic, I think you really need to be on top of where your notes are and where you're putting your information. So I think having everything online and knowing that it's there, it helps so much. Because you know you can go back to it at any point. You really only have to take care of your screenshots, as I talked about, and the notes you've made, say, during lectures. So I think having everything on the VLE helps a tremendous deal, especially for, well, it works different for me because I'm a mature student and I like to think I'm more organised than I probably am. But, I think for the younger students, I think it's a big jump coming from school into university, and all of a sudden you're in a completely different environment for organisation. So I found it no different to my day-to-day life, but maybe because I'm already sort of
Mia, you're
before.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're a little quiet there, David. And Mia, for yourself, how did you feel did you find things were in different places, or your communication is sort of distributed? You know where you're going each time, the first place you go to look for something?
Yeah, so at first, as David was saying, I went straight from school. So at first it was a bit of a shock to the system, trying to find everything, but it's actually pretty well laid out. Quite a lot of all our stuff is on one website, and then we have our Snapchat group, obviously.
Okay.
But it's quite easy to find our stuff. And even if you get lost, that's the joy of the Snapchat group, is you can ask, do you guys know where this lecture is or something, and someone can help you.
And I think, sorry, if I butt in here, I get other members of staff. The staff that I work with know the students will respond on Snapchat. So if they want an answer from students, or they need to get a message to students, they'll say to me, "Oh, can you put a message out on Snapchat?" They might not necessarily want to participate in doing this themselves, but they know the message gets to the students. Yeah.
And Suzanne, just wrapping a couple of questions up from the chat room there about wanting to replicate this in another tool. Is there anything else you can recommend? There's places like mine where I couldn't get Snapchat through the door because security and GDPR. It's a real challenge at the moment with some of those sort of tools.
Yeah.
And other features in Snapchat that are missing that maybe somebody else could pick up. And somebody mentioned, could you do this in Teams or somewhere else?
Yeah. So I think when we look at the use of social media in learning and teaching in higher education, all the literature always focuses on Twitter, it focuses on Facebook groups, and sometimes WhatsApp. WhatsApp does the same things, but I think I highlighted earlier, in order to communicate with students on Snapchat, I would have to have their mobile phone numbers and they would have to have mine. Snapchat, we join with the Snap code, so there's no sharing of that private information with each other. Thinking about tools where I guess use of social media is not encouraged within institutions. I'm just having a think about. I'm not 100% sure. We'd have to give some more thought to that. To be honest.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'm sorry, we are running out of time, but I was going to say that the questions that have been asked are on the YouTube recording. So I'm looking at my other screen here, in the chat room there. So there's some other questions there. So maybe we can pick that up in that area and continue on Discord, because we are running out of time now for this session. But yeah, there's a lot of questions there. So I'll ask the audience as well to pop back and have a look at your answers on the recording, because that'll stay live for a while. So Suzanne, David and Mia, thank you very much. Really interesting and successful project you've run there, and hopefully you can continue this next year into the next academic year. So thank you very much, three of you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, David and Mia, superstars. Well done.